What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be going over my Lightning Storm build here for Season 9, and I am really enjoying playing this build, even though it's not as powerful as, say, something like Pulverize or the Wolves build. It is still incredibly fast at farming, especially if you like to run Infernal Hordes. Now, obviously, I'm creating all these builds in hardcore, and I was actually surprised by how tanky this build actually felt when I did take it into high tier pits. And overall, I'm pretty satisfied where it is at as a solid B tier build for the class this season. Without really top end gear, I've been able to easily kill Belial, farm Torment for content, as well as clear a pit 90 where I made several mistakes that cost me quite a bit of time, but nevertheless, it was pretty easy to do. However, I will go ahead and mention that if you plan on clearing above a tier 100 with this setup, which you can do, you will need some pretty insane gear. So unless you're a diehard Lightning Storm fan, I wouldn't recommend this build if you're planning on pushing into tier 100 plus pits. But the first thing I want to do is go ahead and show you guys how to play this build, and then we'll go over all of the pieces that make up the entire setup. So this Lightning Storm variation is using the Wildheart Hunger Boots, so we will be leaning heavily into shifting buffs to build up our damage as well as attack speed. However, I do have a secondary non-mythic version of this build that does not utilize the Wildheart Boots, so if it's not something that you want to deal with, you are perfectly fine using that setup as well, and just switching out the chest and ring for the mythic items in this setup. So as always, with any Druid build this season, we're going to be using Grizzly Rage, and the first thing you want to do before you shift into Grizzly Rage is build up your shifting buffs. And we're going to do that by alternating Maul and Lightning Storm. Once we have our shifting buffs and our 50 stacks of Wildheart Hunger, we're going to go ahead and shift into our Direwolf form with Grizzly Rage. Now once you're in Grizzly Rage, all you have to do from here is cast your Lightning Storm. Now, the key to this build when you are doing normal tier 4 content is to just use Howl every once in a while, and you can just cast your Lightning Storm, and the damage you get from that will be decent enough to pretty much clear any tier 4 content except for maybe Belial and high tier pits. Now, when you're looking to clear high tier pits or first phasing Belial, you're going to want to stack out your clarity buff, and you're going to do this by using your companion skills. So what my rotation typically looks like when I'm doing that content is I use my companion skills, then I hit Blood Howl, and then if my companion skills come off cooldown, I'll use them again to maximize the clarity buff, and then I'll continue casting Lightning Storm. And what this does is snapshot the clarity buff into your Lightning Storm damage for the entire duration you're channeling Lightning Storm. However, if you need to dodge an attack or just reposition your character and you stop channeling Lightning Storm, you will have to repeat this rotation to snapshot those damage buffs back into your Lightning Storm. So if you can imagine, the build gets quite busy even on the non-Wildheart setup, with you needing to use your companion skills, Howl, and then continue channeling your Lightning Storm. So as you guys could see, not an overly complicated build, but a pretty busy build compared to something like Wolves or Pulverize, where you're just dealing your damage and you're not worried about snapshotting anything. Now again, I want to mention that doing these snapshots will be required if you want to optimize your damage for high tier content, regardless of what variation of Lightning Storm you plan on using this season. So if that's not something that you want to do, this is not the build for you. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and go over the build. So on our helmet, we're going to be using Tempest Roar, and this is a required unique for this build because we are going to be utilizing the Grizzly Rage ultimate to shift into Dire form. And if you're a new player, what this helmet does is turn your storm skills into werewolf skills, so that way they can be utilized inside of Dire form. And as for the affixes on the gear, the best two affixes you can get are willpower as well as wild impulses, and I did get lucky enough to get both of those with a GA. And if you plan on masterworking this thing, a perfect Tempest Roar would have all three masterwork crits going into the willpower affix. However, if you get a mix of willpower as well as wild impulses, you'll be perfectly fine with that too. Then we are going to be running the OP chest for every season, and that is Shroud of False Death for the +1 to all passives, as well as the big chunk to all stats and the max life with all of our masterwork crits going into all stats. Then another required unique for this build if you plan on scaling into high tier content is the Unsung Ascetic Wraps. And the big thing you're looking for is a GA to Lightning Storm with all of your masterwork crits going there, as well as a perfect multiplier, so you're getting that massive damage with your double strikes when you crit with Lightning Storm. Then on the pants, like I said, we're doing Grizzly Rage Ultimate, so we need the Direwolf aspect, which has been swapped to a utility aspect for this season and is a welcome change, and it was a much needed change to make this build possible. Then we're going to be doing max life willpower and a roll of armor because you will need that to reach your armor cap for Torment 4. And then you can temper whatever you'd like. I have some total armor. You can get health if you want to. And I also have some lucky hit chance. And again, that can be whatever you want it to be. Then on to our boots, that's going to be the Wild Heart Hunger unique, and again, another required unique if you plan on running this variation. And you're going to be looking for a GA to the Heightened Sensitive passive, because that's really where we're going to get most of our damage reduction to make this build feel extra tanky. And I am playing this in hardcore and I haven't died yet, and that's pretty amazing considering Lightning Storm is not known for being the tankiest of builds. Now, obviously, if you don't want to run the Wild Heart variation, the Bestial Rampage passive is not mandatory, and I would recommend that you swap to Lupine Ferocity instead for the bigger damage multiplier. Then onto our two-hand weapon, we're going to be using a staff, and I know I get a lot of questions about this, but the reason why we use a staff instead of a pole arm is because we get more attack speed with two-hand staves. But if you would like just to have the additive vulnerability damage, you can run a pole arm instead. And then we're going to be looking for willpower, max life, and critical strike damage. And if you can find a G to willpower, that would be the best in slot here. And then we're going to be running some storm critical strike chance and then chance for lightning storm to deal double damage tempers, with all of our masterwork crits going into the double damage temper for lightning storm. Now, if you would like to solely rely on your Clarity passive buff for your critical strike chance with this setup, you can obviously swap out of that crit chance temper and go into something like more critical strike damage. However, you will be more reliant on casting your companion skills to get the 100% crit chance with this build, so I would only recommend that if you are a diehard pit pusher. Then on our amulet, we're going to be running a retaliation aspect. You can see here, I have an okay amulet, but it is nowhere top tier. The best in slot amulet would have Envenom, Toxic Claws, and a GA to the Clarity buff passive, with all of your Masterwork crits going there because that is going to give you the bigger damage bonus. However, if you're just looking for a cool farming build, I would recommend putting all of your crits into Toxic Claws because it will give you the more reliable damage in all areas of content without requiring you to cast your companion skills. Then for our tempers, we're going Grizzly Rage Duration and Grizzly Rage Cooldown. And I do have several tempers of this on the build, so that way you can maintain your Grizzly Rage without relying on killing enemies. And you can't overpower with this build, so you won't get any additional duration extension when you're fighting the boss. So it's really helpful to have this in your setup. Then on our first ring, we're running the Rampaging Werebeast aspect, and we're picking up some max life, a GA to attack speed, and that's the big one with all of your crits going there, and then some more critical strike chance. And like I said earlier, if you want to, you can flex out of this for willpower or critical strike damage. I just like the crit chance because I don't plan on pushing high tier pits. And then we're going for more Grizzly Rage Duration and Grizzly Rage Cooldown. Then for our second ring, it's going to be the Ring of Starless Skies, and the best ring for this build would be a GA to attack speed with all of your Masterwork crits going there. Now for our rune words, I like to run Nagu Kree for that big giant pool to gather all the enemies close together, and that will allow your lightning strikes to focus on an entire pack of enemies without spreading the damage around too much, making it possible for you to clear into higher tier pits. And it's also really nice when you're farming as well. And then for the second rune word, it's going to be Igni Q, so that way we get that automatic bulwark with this setup, and that will help us maintain our Wild Heart stacks while we're in dire form. But I do want to go ahead and mention that do be aware that this actually does swap you into human form out of your werewolf form. So when this rune word procs, make sure you cast a werewolf skill right after it does, so that way you can maintain your bear form Bestial Rampage damage buff. Then for the seasonal jewels, we're going to be running the Idol from Below. Then the Scornful Light jewel to get that multiplicative damage. But again, always be aware that this also adds an additional 10% elemental damage that you'll be taking. And then my favorite jewel for hardcore, the Heraldric Crest, which gives you a decent chunk of damage reduction, as well as the big one, increasing your resistance caps. Now for the Heraldric spell, I like to use the Astral Pillar because we will be channeling Lightning Storm, so we're not going to be moving a whole lot. And this is the best one in my opinion. When it taunts enemies, it makes them automatically vulnerable, and it has a really decent execute mechanic. And that taunt does give you a little bit of indirect damage reduction. Then I like to run the Nebulous Extract Infusion just to give us a little bit more damage reduction. For Arcanas, I'm going Sapping Crux for the vulnerability, and this is really for bosses because you can't really taunt bosses. Then we're going with Bottled Wind for the extra barrier. Now, if you're playing in softcore, go ahead and use Fractured Core for the extra damage. And then lastly, we're going to be running Bloody Charm for the execute. For the consumables, it's always going to be the Elixir of Advantage or the Elixir of Fortitude to give you more max life. Then the incense are going to be Blessed Guide for more willpower, Redemain Buzz for the extra max life, and then Soothing Spices for more resistances as well as additional armor. Then onto the boons, we're doing Gift of the Stag on the Deer for the Spirit Restore. Then because I'm playing in hardcore, I like to go with Iron Feather. However, you can go with Swooping Attacks for more attack speed. And then we always have to pick up Avian Wrath for the critical strike damage multiplier. On the wolf, we're going pack leader because we'll be utilizing our companion skills so much to get our clarity buff snapshot into our lightning storm. So this is a must-have on every single lightning storm variation this season. And then last but not least on the snake, we're going with masochistic. Now into our skill tree, we're going 1 point claw and 1 point maul, but you could just put 2 points into maul. It doesn't really matter. Then on our core skill tree, we're going 5 points into lightning storm, then moving into primal lightning storm for the chance to immobilize. Then we're picking up 1 point heart of the wild and 3 points into wild impulses. In our defensive tree, we're going 2 points ancestral fortitude, 3 points into vigilance, as well as 3 points into backlash. And we'll always be able to maintain backlash because we will be using the Bloodhound offensive skill. And then we're going to be moving into innate Bloodhound to give us that big damage multiplier. Then for the companion tree, we're going 1 point into wolves, 3 points into nature's reach, 3 points into feral aptitude, and then 1 point into ravens, moving into brutal ravens for the 2 additional ravens. And that's what's going to make it where we can overflow our Kree rune with our Nagu Kree rune word, and that's going to give us that massive AoE pool. And then the MVP of this build is going to be the clarity passive. And as you guys can see here, whenever you cast the companion skills, it gives you a massive amount of multiplicative damage as well as critical strike chance, and it stacks up to 3 times. So when you have a GA to clarity on your amulet, you're going to have a ton of ranks to this, which is going to give you a massive amount of multiplicative damage and obviously always give you 100% crit chance. And like I said, this snapshots into your Lightning Storm damage, but every time you stop channeling Lightning Storm, you will have to stack this buff up again in order to get the benefit of this passive. Then moving down to our Wrath tree, going 2 points Elemental Exposure, and then 2 points of Bad Omen. Then 1 point Neurotoxin, 3 points in Venom, and then 3 points into our Toxic Claws passive. And do remember the damage multiplier from this passive doubles while you're in werewolf form. Then moving down to our ultimate tree, going 3 points Defiance, 3 points Natural Disaster, and 3 points Resonance. Then we're going to be picking up 3 points Quick Shift and 3 points Heightened Senses. And then on our ultimate, it's going to be 5 points into Grizzly Rage. Moving down to Supreme Grizzly Rage just to maintain our Fortify. And then on our key passive, it's going to be Bestial Rampage while you're using the Wild Heart setup. But like I said, I do have a setup without Wild Heart boots. And if you're using that variation, go ahead and use Lupine Ferocity. Now onto our Paragon board. On our starter board, we're going the Headhunter glyph. For the second board, that's going to be the Thunderstruck board for the big multiplier. And then we're going with the Earth and Sky glyph here. Then our third board is going to be Lust for Carnage for that big damage multiplier from our critical strikes. And then we're slotting in the Keeper glyph here. Then the fourth board is Heightened Malice. And then we're slotting in the Spirit glyph here and picking up all the dexterity nodes that we can. And then last but not least, I'm running the Sinister Tendrils board. However, this is called the Constricting Tendrils board in Mobalytics, so do not get those confused. And I like this build over the Ancestral Guidance board because it just has so much more to offer outside of just pure damage, and the damage multiplier is only a 5% damage difference. And then we're going to be slotting in the Electrocution glyph here. Now, if you'd like, you can run something like Fang and Claw in that glyph socket, but I prefer the Electrocution glyph. Now to the last part of our build, it's going to be the Mercenary, and like always, guys, I like to run right here because of this nice passive that gives us a ton of resistances. And then I move down to the Bastion skill to give us the Invulnerability Bubble. Then for the Reinforcement Mercenary, I like to go with Variana because she has Bloodthirst, which gives us a little bit more attack speed when we proc it. But anyways, guys, that's going to be it for the video. That is my Lightning Storm build here for Season 9, and I am sorry I did not get this out to you guys sooner. Things just got a little bit busy over here IRL. But I will be putting out my Boulder Cane video right after this, so if you're interested in that build, do be on the lookout for that. I will probably be putting these builds out within 24 hours of each other. And if you made it this far in the video and you found it helpful, please feel free to hit the like and subscribe because it really helps the channel grow. And if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to post them down in the comment section of this video. And if you see me streaming, which I will be doing more often very soon, go ahead and stop by the stream and post them out there and I will answer them right away. And if you're interested in any of my builds I've made this season, a link to all of my builds will be down in the description of the video. But guys, as always, I hope you're having a great day or a great night depending on wherever you're from, and peace out. I will see you in the next one.